With the water pump bolts, they had a little bit of corrosion on them, so I used a wire brush to clean them up, and I put a tad bit of anti-seize on the threads. That'll help keep the threads from corroding in the future. When you put the water pump in, the water pump has to be clocked correctly to fit, so be sure to place that weep hole that you see right there at 12 o'clock position. Now that the water pump bolts are in, the final torque should be 18 pound-feet. Now that my water pump is installed, I'm going to install the timing belt tensioner, but I am not going to tighten the bolt down. I'm just going to loosely install it. And then after that, we're going to install the timing belt idlers, the left and right side. On those, I am going to be using Loctite on the threads. The timing belt tensioner has a tab that sticks out here. You have to get this tab lined up correctly on the front of the block here. If you look down here, if I can fit my hand, where my finger is, you'll see two tabs next to each other. The tab on the timing belt tensioner has to fit in between here in this slot. So make sure when you install this timing belt tensioner, it is clocked correctly. Now that our pulleys are in place and tightened down, we're going to install the timing belt. We're going to start with the crank pulley and work around counterclockwise. We're going to go around the exhaust cam, the intake cam, and around the water pump, and around the tensioner. One note about doing this, while doing all the rest of the work, you might notice that your cams move away from the timing marks. That happens because the cams are under spring pressure from the valves, so they tend to move even if you don't want them to. So what you have to do when you're winding the timing belt around is use a T50 Torx bit, and while you're winding the belt around, use the wrench with the Torx bit to put the cam in the correct position. Okay, so I've been trying to put the timing belt on unsuccessfully for a few minutes now, and so what I've decided to do is use zip ties on the cam gears to help hold the belts. Since spring tension causes the cams to move from where they should be, while I'm winding the belt around, it's causing the belt to slip and come off of time. So I'm going to use these wire ties to help hold the belt in place. Once I get the belt in the correct place, I'm going to tighten the wire tie, and that should keep it from slipping. Also, down here at the tensioner, this bolt is loose, and I have this tab here with the 6mm Allen. I have it clocked in this position to help keep tension off the belt. You can see that it's loose, and I can rotate it. Now I have the timing belt installed. It was quite a struggle to get this thing on. Um, Even with the tensioner loosened, this thing had a lot of, was very tight between all the pulleys. So I had to fight to get this belt on. So now that the pulley is on, the belt is on, we have to work with the timing belt tensioner. I got the Allen bit in the where it goes here, the 6mm, and I've been turning it clockwise so that I can get a pointer that is here aligned with the notch. I'm going to show you the old timing belt tensioner here and how it works. When you have this installed, you have the belt coming around this side, and you have the 13mm bolt that's through here. This, as this rotates here, it's off center so that the pulley pushes towards the belt or pulls away from the belt. And once you have the bolt in here and you tighten it down, then you loosen it a little bit, you can turn this part clockwise and it'll actually wind this tensioner where this pointer is. It should be here where this notch is. It should be lined up. See, if I grab it, I can turn it with my fingers, and what you want to do is you want to get it to about right there using the Allen once it's actually in there. So that's what I'm doing. Once I get this pointer aligned with this notch, I'm going to tighten down the tensioner bolt, 13mm to 18 pound-feet, and then I'm going to rotate the crank of the motor about 2 times, and then make sure everything still lines up. Here's a bit of a device. I was working here on the tensioner and I just dropped my 6mm Allen down into this air box. So don't be like me and drop your tools down in there. Stuff a rag here so stuff doesn't fall in. At this time I'm going to refill the cooling system with a Dex Cool. I drained about 1.5 gallons of coolant, so I'm going to make sure to put at least that much in. Now that the timing belt is installed and correctly tensioned, I'm going to install the crank pulley with the 4 bolts, the Allen bolts that are 6mm. They are torqued to 15 pound-feet. I'm going to temporarily install the motor mount here, and I am going to start the motor to make sure it runs correctly. Before starting the motor, I'm also going to remove the rag from the throttle body and make sure that the motor is clear of all tools. Get any tools or loose parts off around this area. You don't want anything falling into the timing belt area. Now that I've confirmed that everything is okay with the timing belt, we're going to put the cover back on. There are a couple of rubber grommets here that go in these bolt hole locations. Make sure they are there, they didn't fall off, you didn't lose them. And make sure the clips are correctly placed on your timing cover. And then simply a matter of pushing the cover back on until the clips seat themselves. And then there's a top clip that I took off. We'll be putting that back on. And then we'll reattach the 10mm bolts. This clip that was here originally, you can see where it used to sit because of the groove marks it cut into the plastic. In this position on the timing cover, it gets caught up in between here and between the back cover and the alternator. There's not really enough room for it to fit in between there. So I took this rubber seal, just pulled it out from the timing cover, and I noticed that there is a groove here where it looks like this clip should be. And the reason I say that is because this clip that fits just fine, there's a little groove there as well for it to go. So I think this clip that was originally here was installed wrong from the factory and should be here instead. Now that I have the timing cover installed, I'm going to reinstall the inspection plate here with the 10mm bolt. I've cleaned up the threads on my bolt, and I'm going to use blue Loctite because that's the way it came from the factory. And I'm also going to reinstall my 10mm bolt that holds the power steering line. Now that the timing cover is back on, I'm going to install the crank pulley with the 4 bolts. They are torqued to 15 pound-feet. Okay, now that our pulley is installed, I'm going to go ahead and install the serpentine belt since the motor mount is still out of the way, and that it gives us better access here. I'm going to start here at the power steering pump pulley. It's going to go around the alternator pulley. It's going to go down around the tensioner, the smooth side. Then it's going to go around the crank. And at that point, all we have to do is slip it over the AC compressor, which is down at the very bottom. But we're going to have to use a 15mm wrench to turn the tensioner clockwise to give us enough room to put that belt back on. Okay, so we have our serpentine belt installed, routed correctly around all our pulleys. It's all in line. We're going to install the motor mount next. Remember that these 4 bolts had blue Loctite on them, so we're going to clean them up with a wire brush, and then when we install them, we're going to use Loctite on the threads. Now that our motor mount is in, we can remove the jack and the block of wood from below the engine. So we've put our motor mount back in. Make sure all the bolts are good and tight. This does hold up your motor. So next thing we're going to install is the air box for the air filter. It's one 10mm bolt and one 12mm bolt. The 10mm bolt goes here and the 12 goes down there. I am installing a new air filter. This one is quite old, as you can see. Very dirty compared to a new one. So now it's time to reinstall our air box and air tube, air filter, all that stuff. Got a new air filter in here. We're going to flip this over, put it on top of here, remove the rag, tighten this clamp down, put this hose back into the valve cover, put the clamp on there, and then tighten down these air filter bolts. These are 8 millimeters. The clamp here is 6 millimeters, and we've got to reconnect our sensor here as well. So now that we're done installing everything up top, we're going to reinstall the splash shield down below here. There are two 10 millimeter bolts that hold it in right here, one up here, a plastic clip in here, and then two plastic clips that go in these holes down here. At this time, we're going to put the wheel back on. If you have any rust or corrosion around this area where the wheel sits, it's a good idea to hit it with a wire brush to remove it, and also around the outer surface here of this hub. That's where the wheel sits. And on your wheel, if there's any corrosion in this surface here or on the back side where it meets the rotor, clean that up as well. The wheel's back on the car, so now it's time to lower the car back onto the ground. The lug nuts are 19 millimeter and the torque spec is 81 pound-feet.